Could you please briefly introduce yourselves and provide a little background of how you became involved in the field? So whoever wants to go first.
Sure, I'll start. My name is Robert Schramm. I'm a Board Certified Behavior Analyst. I started out as a education specialist working in education. I was a teacher, special education teacher. I worked as an inclusion specialist and found my way towards board certification as a behavior analyst due to the struggles that I was having finding good supports within the classroom for kids with autism more than anything else. And 2003, Nadine and I met. Actually, in 2000 we met, but in 2003 we got married. I had just recently received my board certification, and Nadine, being of German descent, we chose to move to Germany together and started a service called Knospe-ABA based on Nadine's maiden name. And that's been up and running now for something like 16
Almost
years.
17 years in January. Yoo-hoo.
Yeah, just like the Global Autism Project.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Same timing. We started around the same time.
Yeah.
When we first arrived in Germany, we were kind of the only show in town. At that point, there was autism intervention therapy centers around the country, but they generally weren't using anything as far as behavioral understanding within their programming. A lot of OT, SLP type services. And there was really the only understanding of ABA at all at that time was from one university was doing something that they had created themselves called behavior therapy based off of Lovaas's early writings. So when we arrived with a new modern form of ABA that included the priorities of verbal behavior, we walked into a situation where the country really was at a dearth of knowledge in what you really could do in a lot of situations for children with the diagnosis of autism as well as others. And so we started working with a few families, right, Nadine? I think our first workshop had 3 families.
I was living in the States for several years in California, where I actually came into the field through Robert. He introduced me to one of the kids, actually through another teacher. I got introduced to a boy with autism, and he was in a Lovaas program back then, supervised by Lovaas supervisors. And I started working, one-on-one with a boy in their home under the Life Institute supervision for several years. And that's how I got introduced to ABA, to the ABA approach. And I was always curious how autism intervention looks in Germany. So I was always keeping in touch. I tried through the internet, keeping in touch, finding out more about German autism intervention and all of it. And I got to know 2 or 3 families who were trying to do so-called ABA in Germany, which was what Robert was doing, pretty much saying old style ABA. What they were trying to
drill
do
and kill practice.
Yeah. Locking the kids like behind the table, they sent me videos and it was just horrifying. And when we decided to move to Germany, where originally our plan was to just stay for 1 or 2 years so Robert could get to know my family, my culture and everything, there was such a big need, and we actually went to the family's home just to help them out with their kids, just to show them what could be done and how it could be done in a very playful and motivating way for the children. And then, all of a sudden we had so many families contact us, and we, after like 2 or 3 months being in Germany, we were 20 to 25 days on the road, going from one family to the other. And at the beginning, just had the family charge, we just had them pay the traveling fee, and we did our services, just for free because we were just trying to help them out. But then reality kicked in, and we're like, okay, we have to come up with a plan here, how we can systematically help families, with their kids with autism, and help the parents how they can help their kids.
And so we started to do that. We came up with a program that was very different to what was happening in the US at the time in general. It was because there wasn't an infrastructure for ABA services or behavioral services of any kind. We really had to focus in on parent training as our main focus. And I'm so glad and lucky that that was the situation, because in doing so, we didn't fall into the traps of having to having to feed families day in and day out with outside service providers, with behavioral interventionists. We instead took the tone of how do we teach parents how to interact in ways that will be beneficial to them and to their kids' development, so that regardless of whether we stayed in Germany or for how long we were there, or whether they had to move or they had issues, there was always a caregiver in that child's life who understood the behavioral principles, who knew how to implement them in meaningful ways. Whether or not it was an intensive early intervention program or not was less concerning to me than were they making good decisions from day in and day out. And ultimately, we started to find really quickly that when a family understands what they're trying to achieve and how to do it themselves, that the kids end up getting more than 40 hours a week of good programming, because the parents just make good choices all day long, and the kids start to make good choices based off of that new environment that the parents are setting up.
And once the parent was able to understand how they can change their behaviors to make the interactions with a child more successful, and they saw finally some progress with the kids, they were so motivated, like, okay, what can I do next? Tell me what to do here. And it was so awesome to see.
Yeah, and the real shame about it is that we were seeing like in 6 months with a family there, we were seeing more progress than that child had seen in the last 6 years of their lives. So these families that we talked to were blown away. They started telling everyone, you got to do this ABA and ABA. And it just became this big thing where everyone was talking about this ABA. And then, of course, there were people who were outside of the field and people who were already in autism intervention in Germany who started getting really nervous about this cult of ABA that was coming in. And so there started to be lots of discussion from other people about, is ABA good? Is it bad? What are these things? And then they started to assume that ABA was all traditional 1970s Lovas ABA. And so we had a lot to do, not only in showing families how to help their kids, but also in teaching the community in Germany.
Well, to raise awareness, but also to clear up so many misunderstandings, which is actually still going on now in 2020, which is really sad.
Yeah, I was going to ask what the current understanding of autism is there. Is there any kind of stigma around mental health or developmental disabilities in general? Are you seeing people with autism in schools and in the communities? What is the attitude towards autism?
It is definitely much better than it used to be, when we first started. But Germany is still in Europe a country with the highest percentage of special ed schools. So, like in the US, where all the kids get to go to the same school, in Germany, many of them with a diagnosis and who have learning deficits who don't fit into the regular picture, they go to a special school, smaller groups, more teachers. Because we get to work in the whole country, we are seeing tons of kids in very different schools. And it's very different from what you're used to in LA or in the US in general. It's a lot of more babysitting, where the kids are just, they're trying to get through the day, but there's not that much teaching going on because it's a very often overwhelming situation for the teachers in the classroom. Where we had the first kids back when we started, a couple years after we started, in like 2006, where we found schools, a principal who was open to take in a kid with special needs. And then he had a great, teacher. And then we actually had the first child in Germany who got to go to a typical school, to a regular classroom with a one-on-one aid. So that's how it started. And we could show them, how you can actually include a child who is a little different than the others. Yeah. So but it's not common that every child, like it's in the US, gets to go to a regular school. It's pretty much special ed classrooms, special ed schools. So they're like tucked away.
I think it's much better now than it was. I think we see a lot more of it, but I think our company and the other behavior analysts that work with us have had a lot to do with that. I came to Germany with the mindset of an inclusion specialist, which is one of the jobs I had in Manhattan Beach before becoming a behavior analyst. And, to me, it always didn't make sense why we were putting kids in a special place just because of their diagnosis. And so it was all about trying to prove that they could succeed. Now, I understood that they were struggling because they really weren't taking into account behavioral contingencies with children, and they were often reinforcing the negative behavior that they were seeing. And kids were learning that the more outrageous their behavior became, the more likely they were to get freedom from the expectations. And so you just saw things snowballing out of control. But once we were able to go in and for an individual child, change that perspective and get people to understand that the way that you interact and what you reinforce increases the types of behaviors you see, and that you can make really meaningful changes fairly quickly in time, we started to be able to change that. When we first got to Germany, I was the first Board Certified Behavior Analyst that Germany saw. I think now we're up around 22 or so. Many of which have come through our institute, have worked with Knospe-ABA and are out on their own now. But there's even an ABA for high, what's it called? It's a society of behavior analysis. It's a society of behavior analysis that is a chapter of ABA International. So that's one of the accomplishments that we've been able to do over the last 15, 17 years.
You've been watching Autism Knows No Borders. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know what you think in the comments section. Click here to watch this interview in its entirety. You can also find us on your favorite podcast app. Tune in each week for engaging conversations of how people across the globe are inspiring change and building community. Thanks for watching. Take care.